Hello again. I'm bound to say that I get a little ticked off sometimes with constantly being told that my ancestors were responsible for the sufferings of Africans who were traded as slaves and in some cases transported across the Atlantic Ocean against their will. None of this was my doing, nor was it something initiated by Europeans. In Black History Month, we are reminded of the existence of large and prosperous empires in West and Central Africa, which flourished before the arrival of white Europeans. The one thing which is never mentioned is the source of the prosperity of these cultures. In 1351, a Berber scholar and explorer from Tangier set off across the Sahara from the Mediterranean coast of Morocco. Ibn Batoutah had already travelled extensively in Asia and the Middle East, and now he wished to see what lay south of his own homeland in the largely uncharted country of West Africa. After crossing the Sahara in a camel caravan, Ibn Batoutah arrived at Tagaza. This is now in the north of the modern-day country of Mali. Slabs of rock salt were mined here at the time that Ibn Batoutah visited the town, and the heavy work was undertaken by slaves from the Masusa tribe. In the description to this video, I give references to this, and in this particular case, it's Levtzion and Hopkins, 2000. You can find the information in the description to this video. After spending some time in Tagaza, the caravan moved south again, eventually reaching the capital of the Empire of Mali, which lay on the banks of the river Niger. This was a Muslim realm ruled by a black African sultan. Slaves were so common that Ibn Batoutah was even given one as a present. After looking at other districts of West Africa, Ibn Batoutah returned to Morocco, travelling with a caravan which was transporting 600 female slaves north across the Sahara. To the east of Mali lay another black realm which was so extensive at one time that it might not inaptly be called an empire. This was known as Canaan, and our information about it comes principally from Arab geographers. In the 7th century, a leader of the Arab armies which conquered North Africa established a base in the middle of a dense forest which at that time covered part of the Tunisian coast. This grew into a city called Kairouan. Mosques and a university were founded, and the city traded with a power which had grown up in Central Africa, not far from Lake Chad. Some of the nomadic tribes which roamed the savannah south of the Sahara Desert had banded together and put down roots, building walled towns. By the 9th century AD, Canaan was one end of a busy route running south from Kairouan and ending in their own territory. Al-Yaqubi, a geographer writing at that time, said that, "I have been informed that the kings of the blacks sell their own people without justification or in consequence of war." Canaan's prosperity was based upon exporting goods north to the Arab world of North Africa. Camel caravans travelled across the desert carrying two principal cargoes. One was salt. There were mines where this was dug out by slave labour. The other thing which was sold to the Arabs was people. Those who ran Canaan used to make regular raids into areas where the Bantu tribesmen were less well organised and then take them prisoner to be sold to Arab merchants. In the early years of Canaan, about 1,000 slaves a year were sold in this way, but by the 15th century this had increased to 5,000 a year. Both the internal economy of Canaan and its external mercantile activities were based upon slavery. Slaves worked the salt mines and also undertook much of the heavy and unpleasant physical labour in the cities and farms. The centre of political power in Canaan shifted over the years, and by the middle of the 16th century the realm was governed from Bornu, which lay on the banks of Lake Chad. Slavery was now very big business, and it has been estimated that something in the region of 2 million slaves passed north over the centuries. All this great trade had nothing at all to do with Europe. It was centred around Tripoli, the capital of the modern state of Libya. Writing of the situation on the route taken by the slave caravans across the Sahara, Martin Meredith, an expert in the history of this culture, had the following to say. Wells along the way were surrounded by the skeletons of thousands of slaves, mostly young women and girls making a last desperate effort to reach water before dying of exhaustion once there. I give a reference to this if you look for Meredith 2014 in the description to this video. By this time, after the 15th century, the realms of Canaan and then Bornu were Muslim, the people there having embraced Islam as a result of coming into so much contact with Arabs in the course of the slave trade. This meant, of course, that they were compelled to go further afield than their own lands in search of slaves to sell. Mindful of the prohibition laid down in the Hadith about enslaving Muslims, they began raiding ever deeper into the forests of Central Africa and bringing back prisoners of war who could be sold to the Arabs or forced to work in the salt mines. The slave-based economy of Bornu lasted, almost incredibly, until the 19th century. Enough has been said, perhaps, to show that slavery existed in sub-Saharan Africa long before white Europeans first visited the area in the 15th century. It is sometimes claimed that the nature of slavery in Africa was different from the chattel slavery with which we are familiar, that is to say, men and women being bought and sold like cattle. The slavery we've talked about here this morning, with thousands of black slaves being sold to merchants who transported them across the Sahara Desert, was chattel slavery, precisely the same as the transatlantic slave trade and carried out exclusively by black rulers. Nobody would deny that the interest of Europeans from the 15th century onwards in buying slaves acted to encourage the slave trade in Africa, but they didn't create it. Obviously, when new buyers appear on the scene of any commercial activity, especially those willing to buy as much of any given commodity as can be supplied, this is bound to stimulate the demand. The market, it's always the way. Demand always has the effect of increasing supply. Human nature being what it is, when it became known that white visitors were desperate to acquire slaves, there were plenty of merchants only too ready to satisfy the demand. This then is the myth of slavery in West Africa, that white people from Europe caused it, and that before Europeans came, this part of Africa was some kind of paradise with everybody living together amicably. Our supposed guilt is built upon a barefaced lie.